Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am here talking to the directors of the European Think Tanks Group. It is a group of think tanks from European countries who are like-minded institutes working on international cooperation. I'm joined by Dirk Messner, who is the director of the German Development Institute. I'm joined by Andrew Norton, who's the director of research at ODI from the UK, but who's standing in for Kevin Watkins, his director, who couldn't join us today. By Paul Engel, the director of the European Center for Development Policy Management, ECDPM, based in the Netherlands, and Giovani Grevi from FRIDE in Spain. The European Think Tanks Group is currently drafting a joint memorandum to the new EU leadership who will come into place in the second half of this year. And I would just like to ask Dirk, you to perhaps explain to us the context of this memorandum that you're preparing and the focus of it.
Yeah, we already published such a memorandum on development in 2010 for the last leadership of the European Union. And we focused the whole memorandum in 2010 on development cooperation and aid from the European Union to developing countries. This time it is different. We ask for a new kind of action for managing global development challenges from three different perspectives, which we would like to emphasize on. The first perspective is still we need investments in development challenges which are relevant from a solidarity perspective in order to help developing countries to move forward in terms of socioeconomic development, stability and democracy. But secondly, we focus on global development challenges which also and at the same time affect on us as European countries. So it's not only about solidarity actually. It is also about our self-interest. We need to define our self-interest in these areas we are going to discuss in this debate here, and we should build more and more our investment in international cooperation on reciprocal interests, not only on solidarity. And the third aspect is that we need to learn as, let's say, on a global citizenship perspective, that in these 5 global development arenas, we need to focus on elements which we all, each country on earth, need in order to prosper nationally. So global development challenges goes far beyond development cooperation. And this is our basic issue which we would like to push forward here. And of course there are many global interdependency problems, but we try to figure out the most important ones. We try to develop an agenda for global interdependency problems, focusing on 5 big and important areas. And the first important area we focus on is sustainability. So if we don't move towards a sustainable global economy, poverty reduction and stability will not be possible. The second big area is then on organizing a global economy framework towards equity, resilience and accountability mechanisms when it comes to global economic governance structures. This is important for developing countries, but also for European countries, obviously. The third dimension which we focus on is on democracy, good governance and human rights. This is something which is very important for our identity as Europeans. This is the normative starting point for our foreign policies and foreign-oriented activities. But at the same time, we think this is a very important goal which we should focus on globally. Our fourth element and our fourth dimension we discuss is security and fragility, and how to manage security and fragility. This is a very important challenge for more than 1 billion people worldwide, but the same kind of instability has also impacts for us as Europeans, and we try to see these two sides of the same coin. And then last but not at all least, it is about poverty reduction in the global economy and equity around the world. Because equity is an issue which is relevant also for us as Europeans, and we would like to see this as a basic principle for pushing and further developing the global economy as such.
Thank you very much. Andrew, I'd like to ask you to briefly outline the chapters that ODI is leading on in terms of poverty and inequality and on trade and financial aspects.
Thanks very much. I think the trade and financial chapter, that's framed in terms of this challenge about a world economy that should be more equitable, resilient and accountable. There are a lot of potential dimensions to that. You could look at the regulation of financial institutions, many other things, but I'll speak briefly about two dimensions. Trade policy in the EU, and also the question of, if you like, a global tax architecture that's fit for the 21st century. We already know that a third of global trade, if you like, takes place in the form of internal transactions within multinational enterprises. So there is a great deal of focus and a real need for global collective action on the tax agenda. In terms of Europe, this could mean pushing for member states to be role models in terms of transparency. The vexed issue of tax havens within Europe is something that we feel there is scope to take forward a productive global agenda on. And also it means, if you like, showing leadership on the principles of the Financial Action Task Force on, if you like, global concerns in that area. I'll speak briefly also about the poverty and inequality agenda. Tackling poverty and inequality is at the heart of the European model of integration. Europe has comparatively low levels of inequality and very high levels of social provision and particularly social protection. So these are areas where we think Europe has something to offer the world, but also has an interest in a world that is going to hopefully get better at tackling inequality. We know from the work, the recent high-profile work of Thomas Piketty and others, that global elites are increasingly separating from their countries of origin, and that's a concern. It's a concern not just in wealthy countries, but in poorer countries. And these processes undermine growth, undermine poverty reduction, but also potentially undermine, if you like, a secure environment for the world to develop within. You know, there is good research that shows that. In terms of the poverty agenda itself, we think the EU should remain firmly committed to sustaining escapes from poverty on a global scale, and this has a number of dimensions in terms of understanding better the dynamics of poverty at the local level, and also understanding better the political economy dynamics that produce highly unequal societies with unacceptable levels of poverty.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Giovani, if I could come to you to say a bit about the chapters that you're working on related to conflict and security issues and governance and human rights issues.
Thank you very much. Security and conflict are key issues to a broader development agenda. Violence feeds violence, and fragility is spreading to a number of countries in the EU neighborhood and beyond. This calls for a strong engagement on the part of the European Union. The European Union has important assets to respond to these challenges. It has financial instruments for the long term, it has critical mass, it has a wide experience. But at the same time, while many of the tools are there, the question is to bring them together in a truly integrated approach, which is able to tackle the drivers of instability not only at the local level, but also in a wider and comprehensive fashion, the global drivers of instability, such as climate change, access to resources, resource insecurity, which can fuel further instability in fragile countries. So part of the agenda is certainly to bring together the instruments of the EU and to work closely with member states, being on the same page in tackling factors of fragility, and that requires leadership. There would be a strong call for leadership at the top to pursue this, and then refocusing, putting conflict prevention at the top of the agenda as a starting point of a EU engagement in tackling fragility and creating the conditions for lasting and sustainable development. Equally important as a prerequisite for stability and development is good governance, democracy, human rights. Promoting democracy and human rights is very important to what the EU is, to its credibility as an international actor, given the investment that the EU has made in this direction. Clearly, there has been a gap, oftentimes, between statements and action. We have seen the shortcomings of the EU approach and that of other international actors, for example, on the occasion of the Arab Spring and the following transitions. There is a need to fully appreciate the domestic determinants of transitions and obstacles to these transitions, to put an emphasis on questions of accountability, of transparency, of responsiveness between state institutions and citizens. This is where internal drivers are predominant and external actors have to come in a very targeted, in a very focused way to facilitate domestically driven processes. And in this sense, therefore, the agenda for the EU will have to be one of identifying the actors of change within different societies and different political systems, engage with them, engage with larger and smaller civil society organizations, facilitating the access to support for these actors, engaging them also as partners in dialogue as to the necessary reforms, while also taking into account of the broader context, once again, of this engagement, which is a context where a number of international players are interacting with countries in transition, and therefore the European Union will have to shape and frame its engagement in cooperation, where possible, with other international partners, and certainly anyway thinking of its offer, of its package in relation to that of others too.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Dirk, if I could just come back to you to talk about the chapter on climate change policy, which the German Development Institute is leading on.
Yeah, in the field of climate change, globally, as we all know, we are not at all on track. We are moving towards a 4 degrees warmer world, and natural scientists are demonstrating to us that this implies that we are probably running into tipping points regarding the Earth system. So climate change is a huge challenge for poverty reduction. It is a huge challenge from a socioeconomic development perspective. And it is also a challenge for security, because we might run into distributional conflicts and resource conflicts based on global warming. So climate change is a major issue which is impacting several policy arenas. And Europe could play a very important role here, because as Europeans we do have a good reputation internationally in this field. We are one of the pioneers in this field. We do have ambitious targets regarding low carbon development, energy efficiency, renewable energies within our energy mix, and globally we are investing in many arenas in development cooperation and other fields in low carbon development and climate change cooperation. So our reputation is good. Our perspective is that in the context of the financial crisis, we lost a bit momentum in climate change policies from a European perspective, and we emphasize that we should do more, again more, in the field of climate change policies. Several elements are key from our perspective to move forward the climate change arena. The first one is that we have to understand and to emphasize that climate change policies are not only environmental policies. We are talking about a central foreign policy issue. So our foreign policies, talking about the policies of the European Commissions, should take up this issue as one of the major priorities. It is a foreign policy issue. Our second point is then that to move forward global climate policies, for example in 2015 in Paris, in the context of the global climate negotiations, to push this kind of process forward and to organize successes, we need to reform our European emission trading scheme. This has been a pilot globally, and it was very successful at the beginning, but reforms are needed. And if we don't get our homework done, we cannot expect major successes at the global level. So homework needs to be done in the climate arena. And the third very important element and point here is that we argue for building up pioneer clubs or clubs of ambitious partners moving towards low carbon development. Let's call those clubs transformative low carbon clubs. And Europe could do a lot here. This is, on the one hand side, important from a climate perspective and a global warming perspective, but it's also interesting for our industries, because our industries are strong in climate efficient technologies. So this is another example for a policy field in the domain of global development challenges, where global perspectives and being able and capable to push development cooperation forward in this field matches very nicely with our own interests, because our technology advantages are exactly in this field.
Wonderful, thank you. Paul, could I ask you to conclude our discussions by telling us a bit about the implications for the EU for this memorandum that the European Think Tanks Group is working on?
Yes, I think the first thing I would like to say is that these 5 development challenges, global development challenges that we have identified, of course, are not new. And that we believe that the EU has an added value in addressing those that many other actors don't have. So we want to address them, but we are not looking for really new policies. I think we think most of the policies are in place, the ideas are in place, it's now making the implementation more effective. And there are a number of very new issues that have to be addressed. In the first place, and you heard my colleagues say the same thing, domestic interests and external interests are to be aligned. They have to go hand in hand in most of these topics. You can't address climate change just because it is a problem of developing country. It's not a problem of developing country. The same inequality, the same governance, and etc., etc. So the combination of domestic and external ambitions and align them and work on them is a very big challenge, I think, and also the EU needs to address those. Another very big new challenge is that this means that all the comfortable silos that we have created around climate, around development, around trade, around private sector, around energy, they unfortunately don't work anymore. More and more research is indicating, and our understanding and learning is indicating that it doesn't work like that, it is not effective. So we have an enormous coordination and working together challenge in the EU to break through these silos and to make everybody understand and provide the sort of leadership at EU level that what we formerly thought of as let the policies be coherent actually becomes coherent collective action, and that is more effective. Finally, I think the most important thing to stress here is in any of these challenges, these 5 challenges, sustainability, trade, democracy, security and inequality, to just name these 5, there is no way we can work on one or the other. It just has to be taken as an integrated package. And we can formulate different development objectives in the post-2015 agenda, but all of these development objectives will require working on all these 5 challenges at the same time. Therefore, our main message is really to say to the EU, you need to implement what you have in foreign policy instruments and make them work together with your domestic policy instruments and create an environment that tackles these universal challenges in one go and more effectively.
Thanks very much to all of you for helping outline the summary of this memorandum that you're working on. We very much look forward to seeing it in its entirety in September. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.